Williams, and I'm going to be reporting on the life of my great-grandfather, Francesco Bontempo. And this is my grandmother, Joan Bontempo, and she's going to help me tell the story of my great-grandpa.
As Haley said, my name is Joan Bontempo, and I'm happy to help Haley find out the details about the man who I think had a lot of courage to do the things he had to do in the hopes of making a better life for his family. Francesco, or Frank, as everyone called him, was born in the town of Castelnuovo Negresale, which is located in northern Italy, on May 7, 1899. He was the oldest in the family. He had two younger sisters, and one of his sisters died at the age of 16 due to encephalitis. He was raised mostly by his grandparents because he was not real happy about the way his father treated his mother. I believe his grandparents were farmers, and he married Maria Giacomo Ping on November 19, 1921. And shortly after getting married, work was very hard to come by in Italy. So him and his wife, who was pregnant with their first child, agreed that he would leave Italy and go to the United States in hopes that he would make a better living for his family. He unfortunately had to leave Italy illegally because at that time it was illegal to leave. He had a friend who gave him a ride as far as France, and when he got to France, his friend was able to purchase a passport for him, and he booked passage from Rotterdam port, which is in the Netherlands, on the New Amsterdam ship. He arrived at the port of New York at Ellis Island on October 14, 1922. Once in New York, he lived with his brother, his brother and his wife, Peter Bertolio, who also was the person who paid for his passage, which was $50, so that he could get to the United States on this ship. Once he was in New York, he worked for about a year in the coal mines. He once told me he did not see daylight for 6 months at a time. After working in New York for about a year, he saved enough money to come to Milwaukee, where the majority of his relatives were living. In Milwaukee, he lived with his sister and brother-in-law, Peter and Gatine Bertolio, who was his wife's sister and husband. In Milwaukee, he laid terrazzo flooring and did other types of work, whichever he could find. By 1928, he was able to save enough money for his wife and his son, who was now 6 years old, to come to Milwaukee. Before his wife and son could come to the United States, Frank had to become a citizen, which he always said was one of the proudest moments in his life. He also had to have enough money for them to make the journey over here by boat. When his wife arrived, they continued to live in the Bayview area of Milwaukee. They both had to learn the language, which was one of the hardest things they had to do. They both took English classes at the old Beulah Brinton Community Center, which at that time was located on St. Clair Avenue in Bayview. They were both able to speak enough English to get by with. By the time Maria arrived, Frank was employed and working full-time at Filter Manufacturing in the foundry. They finally bought a home at 2483 South Wentworth Avenue in 1955, which is also the home that I am presently living in. Frank and Maria had 3 sons. The oldest was John, then came Jimmy, and then came Frank, who was my husband. Frank was a lifetime member of the Giuseppe Garibaldi Society and a longtime resident of Bayview. He was also a big fan of playing cards, sheep's head being one that he loved, and bocce balls. His main happiness in life was his family. He was a kind, gentle, and caring person who didn't want to repeat the ways of his father. He was always very grateful to be in the United States because he knew that his life in Italy would never have been as good as it was here. He never returned to Italy because in his heart he knew that he was saying goodbye to his family for the last time when he left, and he didn't want to have to go back and say any more goodbyes. Thanks to Frank and Maria, our family also enjoys a lot of the Italian traditions they brought with them from Italy. Christmas always means raviolis. Sundays always meant spaghetti and meatballs and getting together with many family and friends from the neighborhood. Many Saturday nights were spent under the grapevine in the backyard with Frank playing the accordion with all of the family with him. Frank worked at Vilter Manufacturing for 38 years. He retired in 1965 at the age of 66. He enjoyed at least 14 years of retirement, doing gardening and going to his small cottage on East Alaska Lake in Kewaunee County, which is located in northern Wisconsin. He died after a very long, adventurous, and fulfilling life at the age of 80. We thank him for all he brought to our family.
This is one last picture that my grandma had of Frank and his family, and this will also conclude my report on my great-grandfather, Frank Bontempo.